don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. The air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crying in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. My life has value.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Welcome to Toward Anarchy. Thank you so much for joining me. I am Michael Storm. It's terrific to be with you again, as it always is, each time we get together to do one of these things, have one of these conversations. Well, this time, just to let you know right up front before you even get into it, this is the second half of the conversation. If you haven't caught episode 2631, you're missing half the conversation. You got to go back, put this on pause, whatever. Go dig up 2631. Shouldn't be that hard. TowardAnarchy.com, at Toward Anarchy, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. There's a link somewhere out there that'll get you to 2630. This is 2631. You got to go back and catch 2630. That's the first half of this fantastic little conversation that I will remind you of that I'm having across the network. Obviously, we're just coming back from break and you're hearing this, so you're hopefully still aware of what we're talking about. But for everyone else, not listening across the network, it's broken up into two parts, and so this is part two. Go find 2630, catch part one, and we'll dive into what we're talking about here in 2 seconds. Just do me a favor real quick, even if you have to go back and find 2630, click like on this one and come back to it later. Do it now, because when you're listening to it, you're not going to, it's already come and gone. I'm at 10%. I've spent years watching this. I'm watching this phenomenon across YouTube and watching is 1.5 million views, 1.5 billion views, 1 point something, 10%, about 10%. I think that's really the number. And that's a low number because it's a very simple, easy thing to do. All you got to do, just real quick, click that like button wherever you're finding this show at today, and follow along at Toward Anarchy, as I was saying, on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and, X, I'm sorry, Twitter. Boy, I haven't even used that one in a long time. And if you're ever in Topeka, Kansas, stop by Amazing Fantasies, my comic book shop, and say hi, and I'll sell you a comic book, or I'll trade you one. Maybe I'll buy a comic book from you if you bring me one. And of course, visit TowardAnarchy.com. That's where you can find absolutely, for sure, regardless of whatever else, the episodes that I'm talking about. Episode 2630 is the first part of my Anarchist Audit of Anatomy of the State, the little pamphlet. You could call it a book. It's a 57-page book, pamphlet, whatever. If you made it book size, it'd be like 13 pages. It's small, but it's well noted, and there's an index and some things, which I didn't go through the index. I just read the core of the book. I did it at 3 o'clock this morning. I made some notes in an effort to sort of... It's a little bit to do with me, as everything. This is my show. It's about me. I can only think about things in terms of my reality. I can only convey things from my point of view. I can convey things from other people's point of view, but I say, quote, that's a quote, or I, just play their bit and let them run on with it. But I've spent an entire lifetime not reading the great anarchist philosophers, not reading the great economic books from the great economics minds, Keynes, or from the Austrian school, Mises, or before them, Adam Smith, or any of these others. I know of these people. I know of some of their works, and I know of some of the ideas that they come out of. I know about spirit animals out of the Adam Smith camp. But again, as I was saying in the first hour, really, truly, my understanding of these things was formed at a very young age with very little information. And so as I'm reading this for the first time at the age of 53, having already known what this says, basically from cover to cover, without ever having read it, and believing it, basically. I've told you there was one thing I found that I didn't quite agree with, and I'll reiterate that at some point coming up here. Because I made it in my notes to come back to it. But this is my understanding of the world that somebody decided to write down on a piece of paper, and it's pretty neat. And it's pretty neat to come through after a lifetime of proof, of living it through action and through observation and raising the great kids, the happy kids, the smart kids, and being happy and healthy and smart myself, living this ideology and living an individualist lifestyle, not concerned about the states or popular opinion or any of those things, understanding the anatomy of the state, as it were, to be very simple to recognize and understand when you have a very limited source of tools. And unfortunately, that can lead somebody, it can lead them down the wrong path. And not to say that I ever went down any wrong path, but I've spent my time looking at conspiracy and down literally on the street, dodging the pepper spray and marching on the banks and doing these things that are actionable while I talk about these things and experiencing them 100% from the ground up instead of through a book. And so it's nice again to come back and look at these things and find that these are not only good ideas that I came to 99.9% on my own, but other people have been talking about them for a long, long time, and that mine is another reasoned voice and argument in this space that isn't saying the exact same words, can't be accused of just parroting what somebody else says, but actually has his own words and own thoughts about these things. And so I'm analyzing the book. I kind of broke it down, and I made just a little bit of notes on every chapter and every important thought throughout the thing, and in my own words, and as I do in my own presentation, and I'm about halfway through the actual notes that I have. It's timed out really well without any sort of effort to try to other than just look at the clock and go, I have to be done with this thing right now in 51 minutes. We have 51 minutes to finish this thing. So when we left off, we were talking about the sort of things he's talking about, Rothbard is talking about. Amongst others, he mentions other people, and I've mentioned some along the way, and I'll mention more as well as he does. But the sort of these various aspects of the state, and in particular how they retain their power. And one of the things that we've talked about over many times over the years is something that all these things are things that we've addressed over the years in one way or another. It's a really great thing. And to see it all in this space like this. Tradition becomes sort of rooted in the longevity of the state. That was my note. That the longer a territory is ruled by a particular ideology, the more validity the state that pops up out of that ideology, the more validity that state acquires simply through tradition and through time. And I guess it's in the founding documents of this nation where they basically say, we shouldn't throw it out lightly, but if it ain't working, throw it out. And that includes the bums that are propping the whole thing up, or they're using the system to prop themselves up is really, really the better way to say it. The state, it has to seek to literally, in many cases, destroy any idea of individualism or the freedom of the individual. It builds to that. It starts out claiming that it's free and that it's going to protect you, but that ultimately it has to stamp out those freedoms slowly but surely. This is what we see historically through every state. It's why it's easy to look at our own state, as it were, and see it happening, even when the people that say it shouldn't be happening, that how are we letting this happen, are sitting right there saying that it's not happening while it's happening in front of their eyes. It really has to set out to destroy these things because they're antithetical to the collective notion of the state, and it's the thing that I've been very clear about over the years, that the state, any state, right, is a socialist collective engaged in the institutionalized, the legalized theft for the benefit of the collective on the claim, but really just a small percentage of the collective, the political class itself. I like how he points out that guilt is a really powerful tool of the state, and this points towards the division that I was talking about that he mentions here, and that's coming up about the counterbalances supposedly of social pursuit versus the political pursuit, as if they're antithetical to each other, and maybe they were at one time or another. But obviously, the idea is that the social pursuits, the social groups, the social differences, the political differences, the religious differences result in groups that manipulate and move things in their direction, so they capture the power of politics to further their agenda instead of letting their thing be a natural thing that grows on its own, a good idea that grows on its own. Oftentimes the state is captured, but I think we get into that maybe a little bit more as we go along. But it's all about this theft, this redistribution for not the collective. We're told it's for the collective, that it's for the good of the collective, but it really is for the good of a small percentage of the collective. That's what it really amounts to, and that guilt is a part of letting that happen. That guilt about having more than somebody else. You're guilted all the time. You shouldn't have more than somebody else, but you also shouldn't have to work so hard. And it's not fair that this person has that and that person. It's guilt. If you have too much, if you have too little, if you don't have enough, and the reason is because there's no definition of those things. None of those things. Those are all arbitrary things, and so guilt is easy to form in people. All you got to do is trigger the one thing that they think socially is not, that they participate in, is not that it's wrong, that it's unacceptable. When in fact the only things that are wrong are unacceptable are the things that you do involuntarily against somebody, which is the state. It's what the state is. It's involuntary action. It's forced coercion and participation. It's really part of all of its ability to grab hold of and absorb any of the things that might stand in counter of it. How many times have we heard recently about sort of state actors and the statists themselves, I guess, going on about trusting the science, and he gets in there at one point and talks about how science is the new God and the validity of the state. And this is years ago, but there's this perfect example of something that's happening today, and something that he's basically saying, this is what's going to happen. This is what they've been telling you is going to happen. This is what the founders of the nation told you was going to happen, in so many words. You let them capture the money, they're going to rule you. If you let them capture the science, the hearts and minds of the people, if you let them capture the religion and center it in the state and whatever is best interest for the state, selecting that religion to be a state religion and forcing it on other people. These are all part and parcel of the same thing, right? So this same science belief is what drives something like what we're going through right now, that's clearly violating the rights. It's immoral, but it's also violating rights. These things that are supposedly protected, right? With the mass collection and analysis of the data that's going on with all these new technologies employed by the state. Again, one of the ways that the state is able to retain its power, one of those key ways, is by capturing the intellectuals, which captures the science, which uses science as a god, uses science as a dictate. I told you before, looking at these data centers and the AI, and that what we're experiencing is obviously government growth inside this space in the use of AI, because it allows them to collect more data about us, more information about us, control our movements and tax our movements and make our movements criminal. And it's pretty scary, some of the things that are happening out there. I really haven't come together on a flock presentation, because I think it should be ultimately fairly obvious, but I'm still having to explain to people that it's not the same thing as carrying your phone. That's not the same science. There's definitely something to do with intent there, but one of these big ways that the state maintains its power is by capturing the science, and that science and that the guilt and that belief in science, excuse me, are things that are used collectively. The state uses the technology and the data and the employment of it to claim that it knows what's better for us, that it's better for the collective, the us part of it. It's a protection and it's a service that the state provides for our benefit, not its own. But the only ones that really benefit from it in the end are the corporations that put it in place, that were paid by government to put it there, that government uses to move to tax and control our movements. It's completely circular. They feed each other. That's the problem with the state and its ability to transcend its limits. That's a quote that they use and that Rothbard uses in the book. That's because that's where he's going with it, right? These things aren't provided for our benefit. It's done for its own, and so it has to be able to transcend its own limits. It has to be able to grow and exceed its authority and absorb any notion of sovereignty or limitation on state power, and these. He introduces me here, I guess, at this point to Bertrand Juvenal. It's a name I'm familiar with, but again, I don't know the person. I don't know anything about space and time, their space and time, or their contribution. And it's nothing against them. It has nothing to do with them. Again, these things are obvious, and I think these people would tell you that they're obvious. In fact, I'm pretty sure they use the idea, the notion over and over again in this. I may have made a note in it that's coming up here when we get there. I'm really sticking to the order of the book, if you're wondering. While I'm not naming off the chapters, I'm just talking about the core ideas in the book. Some of it is specific to a chapter, but it all pieces together. If you read all the chapters, they make complete sense with what's being talked about, as they should, within the chapter itself. And so at this point, we're talking about how the government retains its powers and the manipulations that it uses, and how tradition and guilt and patriotism, we haven't got there yet, but that's part of it. I don't even know if I put that word in here, but I suppose so. It's patriotism and nationalism. There's some examples of that, them driving home patriotism and nationalism by suggesting that it's best to draft people, that they shouldn't have a choice, that they should have mandatory service, things like that. That defense of the problems of these people over here that they pretty well created themselves is my responsibility when I'm not particularly in danger. That's a concept that they touch on that Rothbard touches on in here as well. That demonization and degradation of other states and other ideas and ideologies, and that turns these basic conflicts between sort of rulers and their beneficiaries that were smaller conflicts throughout history. There were smaller conflicts often fought by hired people and not necessarily about gaining more territory or something like that, but just expressing that this is our territory and defending a particular territory or ideology or something within that space, and letting others know that they can't come into it. It's not always about conquering, but it is always sort of centralized around a socialist ideology, an ideology that you're attacking the state, you're attacking the king, you're attacking the president, you're attacking me. that if you're attacking military installations in Iran, in and around Iran, or the Strait of Hormuz, that you're attacking me when you're not. It's got nothing to do with me. It's not my fight, and it never has been, and these things have been turned into, that's part of the guilt, the patriotism, the nationalism. It's all tied together in sort of finding the spaces where the state can grow its own belief, and how then it can transcend its own limits. Because again, not having read the Juvenal, I don't know it, but he points to the reversal of natural rights expressed in the Bill of Rights to become this sort of permissions granted by the state. We talk about this all the time, how people, and it's even pushed in some of the literature, the educational literature that has been put out over time and simplified, supposedly, the sort of looking at the Bill of Rights and simplifying it and putting forth. It's always couched as being basically a privilege that the state gives us, as opposed to what it was supposedly supposed to be, the codification of natural rights that existed in light of the state. No matter what the state has, that it couldn't transcend its powers, its limits over these individual permissions that we now have that are supposedly protected by the state. He goes on to cover a lot of related things that we've talked about repeatedly over the years. Truly, just at this point in the narrative, it's great because it hits on so many things that we put in so many other words over the years, to be able to have them here and to recognize that we're not alone out here. We're not the first person or the last person thinking about these things by any means. These things that we've talked about, like how the justice system has become adversarial. Again, my words here, but within the context of what he's saying, absolutely what he means, and what these other individuals, Juvenal and other people that he mentions throughout the narrative, that they mean. That the system is, again, it's not for us, it's for them, and the judicial system. They even talk about the organization, the failure of the Constitution in and of itself, how it fails when it creates its own watchdog system that it can manipulate itself. It goes into all of that in short order and hits on all of those particular points and talks, introduces some professors. There's Professor Charles Black, in particular, related to the justice system and how it's supposed to be a check on state power and impartial judges, and that facts and disputes between sort of people and people and the people in the states and the states and the states, and that's what they're supposed to be for. But what they really end up being is these tools that the system uses itself to justify its own power, to justify its own existence, to codify more powers for itself, and that the professor is really just simply trying to tell us that the state uses its own authority to justify its authority. It's something we talked about all the time. That's why its authority is invalid, because it uses itself to justify its own authority. It doesn't use fact, it doesn't use logic, it doesn't use reason, it uses force, it uses coercion, it uses redistribution of wealth, it uses all of these things to justify its own authority. And that's something that, if something is deemed constitutional, it's moral, it's right, it's scientific, it's culturally and socially appropriate. It's anything else in an attempt to, anything other than an attempt to destroy the system itself, really. And if it wasn't meant for the system and all the bad things that are bound to happen, that if it wasn't for the system there to protect you to some greater degree, that it's the only thing that can protect you, that it's historically relevant, that ever-present state, that these are all, it's self-justification through its dictatorship of force and through its dictatorship of morality and legality through its jurisdiction, through the jurisdictional controls that it has. The state is the judge of its own actions which goes against the very notion of a conflict of interest. You can't have a conflict of interest in your justice system when our entire justice system, supposedly what we call the justice system, what really is the tax and control system, is based on this very erroneous notion that the same people who make the laws and enforce the laws and adjudicate the laws and pay for the prisons and profit from all of it along the way can use those things against individual people, set those things up, and pretend like we did it, like you and I have a say in it. You know, what I was saying earlier is it's self-evident, or the words like it, phrases like it, seem to be repeated throughout the narrative, but they're otherwise sort of meant to, when we're discussing much of this, that all the different people referenced and things that I've made claims over and over again myself, to not see it, to willfully ignore or deny the very nature of the state. It's really self-evident. Those people that don't recognize it are there. That's what they have to do. They have to willfully ignore it or deny it. They're ignorant of it. They don't understand how it works, or they understand how it works and they deny that it's dangerous or that it's wrong for it to work that way. It's pointed out that the false paradigm and the sort of party that's in power versus the party that's out of power, it creates a default acceptance of the system for itself, of course, for the power that it grants, particularly the party that's in control, and a simultaneous sort of default assumption that new powers balance the previous powers abused by the previous party in power. It's what I was saying earlier. It's a longer, harder way of saying, once again, that when one is in control over the other party, it doesn't really make any difference. There's not really any difference in the functional nature of the state, regardless of a dictator, regardless of party, because the fundamental nature of the state is to rule of law, whatever you call it, over a territory, and within those confines, the territory and the system that rules, creates those laws, is more important than anything within that territory. That's absolutely true of all, other than maybe the sovereign itself. But of course, the sovereign is the state. Remember, that's the whole point, and that's what we try. That's what democracy tries to make you think, because the people are the state. Of course, the state is the people who live in it, unless, of course, it's been co-opted by corporations, international corporations, national corporations, people with interests outside of it, and their influence and their money is used to control, even install, say, a governor from New York, possibly. I don't know where an example like that would happen in Kansas. Carpetbaggers, you gotta love them. It goes back to really there's a lot of these problems are really simple assumptions that you really have to sort of ignore the previous. They ignore that it's the system that allows these people to do what they do. It's not they themselves. That looking at it that way is a failure to realize that there's something truly systemically wrong with things, not like supposed systemic racism necessarily. Maybe an argument for it at some point, some space, but this isn't it. This is a systemic problem in the very nature of our democracy as it is, such that it is, because of what democracy is. It's the very notion of it itself, that you can vote to force other people to see things your way just because they live under a certain jurisdiction, certain space, whether they were born there or immigrated there or however they ended up getting there. They ultimately didn't and shouldn't have to agree to necessarily some central authority's control over the space, particularly if they're not violating somebody else's property, their space, that individual themselves. These shifts between power and party, I guess this guy, John C. Calhoun, recognizes this, and yeah, you guessed it, I've never heard of the guy. It didn't stop him my not knowing him didn't stop him from suggesting that the minority power should exist at the sort of state level to balance out the centralized majority of the federal system. And that's kind of crazy because we know that it's complete bollocks, right? It's just another state that could abuse its power. Rothbard points this out, of course, because he doesn't agree with the Calhoun guy. But again, everybody, broken clock. In some cases with some people, none of these things are to be accepted, again, carte blanche, to be taken without observation and consideration. He questions what happens when the federal government or many states were to sort of gang up on one another. It's like the Calhoun guy doesn't even come up with that very simple, one sort of control offered, one becoming a control in a group, and then being institutionalized by the state itself to be a method of controlling its control over itself. What I was talking about before, about its ability to absorb anything, any ideas, any people, any procedures within it. Parliament itself, this is something that they mention in this narrative here, The Anatomy of the State. Rothbard, and possibly through one of the others, talks about how the Parliament itself is one of these things, that Parliament was created to become a check by the people on the power of the king, and now it's just another thing. It's just another point. The king is still important, still controls everything, but it's still just another centralized power absorbed by the central authority, recognizing the king's authority, giving permission. That's what I was talking about America's founding, the importance of America's founding, and the idea that they broke away from England, and how people can make the argument that we've never broken away from England or the controls of certainly the crown, if you will, because we still use a lot of their legal precedents and things, the bar associations, the British Accreditation Regency, something. It's all supposedly all tied back, and these laws are more about corporate laws. They're more about giving permission to individuals to create their own states or their own corporations to be able to conduct business with other states and other corporations. And that's another example in and of itself, how I've talked about it over and over again, how corporations are a natural thing because they're agreements between the people who are creating the corporation. They're birthing this new entity that didn't exist before they decided to come together and create it. And they're using the creation of it to protect themselves. And that's what the Constitution is. These guys created this thing amongst themselves to protect themselves. And they even had to come along at some point after it was done and go, oh, we forgot about the people who live here too. Well, we have our corporate deeds in place and everything, the articles of incorporation. We know how we're going to treat each other. But these people, these slaves, these folks out here, they need some protections. They want some assurances. They don't want the crown again. They don't want the Catholic Church again. They don't want Rome again. They don't want all these things. And so we better come along and offer up a little bit of well, we'll call it protections. We'll call them rights, and we'll say that everybody has them and that they're guaranteed when you cross one imaginary line from one sovereign united state to another. Supposedly your central rights would be protected, and it's a neat notion, but it's hardly one that is particularly enforceable, and is thrown out the window by subsequent amendments and reducing the position of the people to just slaves. It really truly is. By the time you get to the 14th Amendment, all people are slaves or citizens or both, depending on their status and their participation within the system, and they are no longer people, and so the rights granted to the people, protected by the state, granted to them by God, whatever it is, don't exist. Those existed for people. Well, people don't exist anymore in America. If you're people, you're not a citizen and you don't have a say. If you're a citizen, then you're subject to citizens' rights and citizens' dictates in the state. Again, how it absorbs everything, every sort of response against it. And it's really easy for it to do in a democratic state. Really easy. because it's believed, again, we were just talking about how it's all perfect. It's right. It stood the test of democracy. It stood the test of science. It's been through the legal system. The courts have looked at it. It's all justified. It's all validated. There's this power creep of government, and he talks about this in relation to the juvenile again. And it's obvious to me what they're talking about is power creep. That's the language that we would use today. Certainly, as a card gamer or a video gamer, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, any of these various sort of role-playing games and things that I'm actively participating in at any given time, there's a thing called power creep, and it's true of comic books and superheroes. Power creep. As the villains get more powerful, the superhero has to get more powerful, and eventually they reach this point where you have to take their powers away because they become too powerful and they're unrelatable. You have to kill Superman. You have to figure out a way to kill Superman because he's so unrelatable. But you kill him, you make him bleed, and then he becomes more relatable again. He becomes more human again. And so it's a thing that really happens because it happens for real. It's truly a power creep thing, and that it's not incidental, but it's natural, and that it's inevitable, and that's what they claim, and I believe that that's true. And it's not the result of any significantly different type of government. Again, excuse me, it just doesn't matter about what type of government it is. The basis for the redistribution of wealth is really truly the same, and the reason for it is the same. The method or who it goes to is the only thing that really differs in any slight way, but the end result is the same. So it doesn't matter if you call it dictator, it doesn't matter if you call it king, it doesn't matter if you call it president, democracy, republic. None of these words matter, because what's happening underneath isn't fundamentally different from one to the next. Do we not understand that about socialism, about communism, about these lofty, wonderful ideas? They don't work. They work on a small scale. They work in a voluntary sense at all. But when you're talking about a larger scale, it breaks down. Rothbard goes on to talk about something that I already mentioned just a little bit. I'm just trying to make sure to hit on each of these points as we go through this. He talks about the conscription in defense of the state. What I was talking about earlier is that it's not optional, right? In a lot of cases, and in a lot of cases, even the smart people suggest, that the investment, the forced investment of the youth in the government and in the military, in particular, as a means of forced service, is good, because then the people who vote on things have a stake in it. It's not voluntary. It's argued that our voluntary system of military is detrimental to the very nature of our democracy, because the people don't have any control over the military in that sense that it's voluntary. They're not forced to do it, so they don't have a voice necessarily in saying what it does. Again, this is about the validity. This is about validating the state through the tradition and all these things, and through patriotism and nationalism and guilt of the same. All of these things come together to really make sure that the state stays in control, that it controls its jurisdiction, and that relationship that I talked about by the 14th Amendment between the state and the people who live in its jurisdiction is changed. It changes over time, and it changes for the benefit of the state every single time, and this is part of it. Sort of refusing to be conscripted is an act of violence against the state. You're not going along with the program. You don't want to be a member of our society, a citizen with privileges. Remember, the flag is right behind me. Join the Mobile Infantry. You can't see it, but it's one of my favorite movies back there. Join the Mobile Infantry. Citizenship, the service guarantees citizenship. That's the quote. Well, they think that's better, because citizenship itself is a very sad thing. It's a construct of the state. It's not about about individualism. It's about sacrificing for a criminal and corrupt state. The same criminal and corrupt state we've been talking about this entire time, right? It's kind of about this time that I knew that there was this quote coming, that I knew it was going to pop up here somewhere. I was sure enough that it would, and it did. War is the health of the state. Because that's what he's getting at by now. You're going to be conscripted. You're going to do it for the reasons of tradition, because the state is right, because the state is good. It should be self-evident that it is, but war is the health of the state. And I've heard it before. I knew that. I've heard it before. I don't know where it came from, and I thought maybe as we were getting up there, because it did. It popped in my eye. War is the health of the state. That's where he's going with this, and sure enough, paragraph later, a page later, the next page, there's some mention of it being right there. War it's the quote. I mean, it's not even a mention of it being there, because he goes on to tell me who it was, because it wasn't him. I didn't know. I could have assumed it was, but otherwise was self-evident. It could have been Rothbard. It could have been anybody, but apparently it was Randolph Bourne who said it. The war is the health of the state. I don't know who he is either. Sorry. Again, nothing on these people. It just doesn't matter who those people are. It's self-evident before I ever knew who quoted it, whoever said it, before I ever heard the quote, before I knew any of that, it was obvious that war, or rather, as I would put it, because I would counter with this, it's not war, it's crisis. It's any crisis, right? Isn't that supposed to be the point of Crisis in Leviathan? That crisis is what feeds the monster. It feeds the beast. I only read a chapter of it, but I got that that's the point. That's what we were getting at. Yeah, the system takes advantage of something like war, any crisis. Hey, let's talk about COVID. How about that one? That was a crisis. They took advantage of it. There's clearly another one of these obvious recent examples, something that has happened, something that he's talking about all these years ago, clearly stating that these things are problematic. That these things will become an issue. They're an issue. They're an issue. They're an issue. It's a real problem. I mean, the obvious gist of it is that crisis provides opportunity, right? See what I did there? Crisis, opportunity, it's yin yang. It's the same thing. It's the same word in Chinese, right? Crisis and opportunity. The state can exercise its authority over its jurisdiction and the people within it, up to including suspending all of their rights and privileges and protections for the very protection of the state, for the crisis, to make sure that the state goes on, that the society goes on, all the way up to and including your life. Absolutely. There's no question about it. That's what it is. Crisis is the health of the state. I think it's obvious, right? It's sort of put to you, really. Does the state spend more time protecting people and property, or does it spend more time with greater all effort in protecting itself? We talked about this in the terms of policing, and we've talked about it in the terms of the courts and the charges and things that they will file against you, and how they're meant to pile on, and that they're not about resolving the problem of damages to person or property, that those things are secondary to the system going through the process and the system making itself money. And that's me again saying that the system is adversarial. Yes, the state, that was his basic question. Does the state spend more time protecting people and property, or does it spend more time protecting itself and its own interests? And the obvious answer is it spends more time protecting itself and its interests. There's no question about it. They get in there, Rothbard touches on the law, how it's naturally derived out of it. I mentioned it earlier, how it comes out of the need to protect property and to provide a sort of unbiased arbitration of disputes between people. So in merchants, in particular, that's why a lot of it is called as merchant law, is commercial law, because it is about that's what they worked in terms of. I don't know how many times I have to point to the Constitution and an Articles of Incorporation and show they're the same thing. It's what you do when you organize a corporation. That's what you do when you set up America, is you organize a corporation, and it's an agreement between the business partners, not anybody else, not the employees, not the town that the business is in, none of these things. Hell, if they're capable of doing it, they set themselves off in their own little zone, in their own little laws, and they call it D.C. or Rome or London, and they have their own rules and regulations within those spaces if they're lucky and are able to do it. But the law itself, our natural law, and this idea that we would have arbitrators and that we would have a thing like a corporation, that a corporation could be a natural thing, is because they provide simple, basic contractual agreements between the parties involved in creating them. We're not involved in the creation of America. I don't know how many times you need to figure that, but it had nothing to do with us. None of us were alive when it even happened. So it obviously couldn't have involved any of us, and it couldn't have involved any of the people who represent us now. This is not possible. They weren't alive then. They're only upholding the tradition that has existed and the system that has existed. They've not proven, they themselves set up a new system. They're not changing anything. It's all wrapped up in its own little ball of self-preservation, and democracy is a sort of little the frosting on top of the cupcake for them, because democracy gives again the illusion that you and I are participating in this thing, that we are the ones that are here making the decisions about how to protect the people from the state, particularly as tools of the state to control and to tax us, use us against each other and against ourselves, using the crisis and the rules of war and the development of their systems bumping up against each other, sort of developed into international law and sort of accepted, and it's interesting how it plays out in terms of war and what one state will do and disregard or regard as they may in these rules of engagement that have popped up, these laws of engagement that have popped up throughout around the world, and how they will choose to, as at their whim, and based on their power set, whether or not they're powerful enough to sort of defend their position, at least for some period of time, do whatever the hell they want to do. That's what I'm getting at. They'll do whatever the hell they want to do. This was the only other thing that I thought was of any sort of difference or question with me that I may have questioned. If I could sit down with Murray and talk with him myself about it, about the entirety of his book, this is the only other thing other than whether or not parasitic existence is a natural existence or not. Other than that would be where he wraps it up, really talking about how history is a race. I mentioned it earlier, how it's a sort of race between social power and state power, but there's really, at this point, hardly any difference. Maybe there was more of a difference in the time that this was being written. Not that it was that long ago. It's really not that long ago at all. And so but there's hardly a difference at this point, right? I think that's the important part. At this point in history, there's hardly a difference. So the claim that social power is the natural power and that state power isn't natural power is I think it relates back to that parasitic existence and claim again. The state isn't particularly natural, but the people that made it are. And so it's their natural tendencies to use the power of the state and to position the state itself ultimately to be that power, that enforcer, because it creates a space between them as an individual. That's part of democracy, right? The things that the state does, it's not doing in our name. That's what started the conversation. It's not we, it's not us. We're not doing doing these things. It's the state. The state did it, and well, it must be okay, but I really don't have a say because they're so powerful. I think it's really ultimately a moot point at this point in history. I think it probably was then too. Not that it was that long ago. We're only talking decades. We're not even talking 100 years ago or something. Murray's been around recently. He hasn't been gone that long. I think he died in 1995. So obviously he's been around in my time. But really with the social power, that's a collective power, and it seeks power through the state. So there's no separating them anymore. It's the only other thing that I'd really argue with him about. The state just dominates these things, and there's another reference that you'd be familiar with today, I think, and it's in our own ingenuity and how we create things, the tools, the tech, how it's all confiscated and how it's controlled and used against us. I was talking about the flock cameras there. It's all taken from us. That's another way the state just absorbs it all and takes it into itself and makes it a part of itself and makes you accept that it's now a part of it, whether you wanted to or not, whether you believe it's moral or not, or individually as a person, because it doesn't matter. Our individual participation doesn't matter at all. I thought that his conclusion is probably mine as well, that the solution, the answer to the state is far from being realized, that it's as far from being realized as it ever has been, and it's getting further and further away from being able to answer it because of things like democracy and the illusion of our participation in the system and the illusion that the system is there for us. Not that even that we're a part of it, but that the things that are done within it are done for us. I argue that it's very much the nature of the state to do what it is, to be what it is, to take, to absolutely realize that the state is, I can't let this go because I start to say the state, that's the very nature of the state to take it. Well, no, it's the very nature of man. It's the very nature of the men and the women who are in control of this state. The state is its own thing. It is its own tool. But there are those, and the people, all of them, the people that get into it, use it for a system of control and manipulation. They want to change something about our reality, something that they don't like, whether it's political or social or religious or whatever it is, and they want to use the power of the state. They want to use force to make their neighbors see things the way they do instead of cooperation, instead of just live and let live, let the neighbor do what he's doing. As long as he doesn't damage my property, then I'm not going to say anything. As long as he doesn't interfere with my right to do, my natural right to pursue the things I want to pursue and the voluntary relationships I want to have with the people I want to have, he has no say in them. But he does when he gets to vote, and it makes your neighbor your enemy. And that's where we are in America. Everybody's an enemy. Everybody's an enemy of your ideology. Instead of who you are as a person, they're an enemy of your ideology. They're an enemy of your political label. They're an enemy of your skin color. They're an enemy of your uniform, or whatever it happens to be, and maybe deservedly so. Certainly in the case of the uniform, definitely not in the case of color. Maybe in the case of some particular individuals of a particular color. Maybe happens. I'm sure it does. There's the white trash. There's every other form of trash out there. No question about it. That's why it's about people. That's the important part in all of this, and it's a part that gets ignored for the system, but not for the system, the state, not for the state. Because the system, the state, it's still just other people. It's other people taking from you and I because they say they can, because they say it's okay to do so, because you let them, because you empower them, because you give them your vote, because you give them your permission to go out there and use the state as a tool for the redistribution of wealth, for the application of what is moral and what is good and what is right and what is scientific, and none of it matters to you because it was just your vote, and you voted for the other guy. You didn't vote for that. That's not what you didn't vote for surveillance when you voted for Donald Trump. The hell you didn't. You voted for Donald Trump. You absolutely voted for surveillance. What made you think that he didn't think that the surveillance was a good idea? Big Brother is certainly a fascist thing. Government is fascist. The rich billionaire guy, even if it's only on paper, being the president of the nation is by definition pretty fascist. What did you expect was going to happen? Besides, even if you take him out of the equation, this is a bigger point, it was going to happen anyway. It was already happening before he got in. It's been years. Your local dictators trying to raise money to pave your streets have been using the cameras to trace you and track you and tax you and hunt you down and make you pay for them to pay somebody else to pave the roads, to run the public schools. That's what they would argue. But the truth is that most of those things are actually paid for by direct taxation, and the things that they have their little gang of thugs out there robbing you and caging you and murdering you for on the streets are of a nature of political and social opinion. They don't represent the attempt to protect person or property. They don't represent even a person. They represent an ideal. They represent a fiction in many cases, a legal fiction called the state. It doesn't really exist. There's no such thing as the state. The state is an arbitrary, imaginary thing. It's a jurisdiction. It's a border. It's not real people. Real people are individuals who can point to a damage, who can point to a wrong, who can point to a culprit, who can make a claim, who can make a case. Those are real things. The state saying that you drove too fast on one of its roads and therefore you no longer have the right to drive anywhere, let alone on their roads, but not in any other state, even without potentially getting in trouble. How is that in the best interests of the people? How is it that the time of the enforcer is spent raising revenue for the state instead of protecting? He's enforcing, right? That's his job. They're law enforcement. They are enforcing the law, and that is the extent of it. There's no greater purpose. There's no greater reason for them to be there. The serve and protect thing is nothing but a slogan that's painted on the side of their cars. The Supreme Court has made it clear, this court of justice, this thing that is its circular reason for itself, the state and its authority to give itself authority, has told itself and its so-called servant protectors that you, as a person, are not its obligation, that the law is its obligation, that under no circumstances any law enforcement officer there or supposed to be there or duly designated to protect you. They are there to enforce the law. That's not the same thing. You can be a victim of the law, and they're there to enforce the law, not protect you from the law. That is their job. It's not a thing. It's not a statement being made by myself or Murray Rothbard or anybody else along the way. It's the very nature of the state using its only tools to fund itself and to justify its own existence. That is the anatomy of the state, broken down, cut up into its little pieces, and observed by somebody presumably smarter than me, but I didn't miss a beat in it. I recommend the read for anybody. Listen, this book didn't tell me a single thing I didn't know other than the names of a couple of people and where a quote came from. There wasn't a single moral, legal, economic consideration in these 57 pages that I didn't already know or understand. But that's me. That's not somebody else. That's not this is the perfect tool to break down that barrier of the statist and the person who believes that the state, for whatever reason, under the right conditions, is the answer to all of our problems, and it's going to solve our problems. That's the audit. I am done. It took 2 hours to do it, but I appreciate you hanging out and doing it with me, and we'll catch you on the next one.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network.